What so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Okay, our speaker today is Katie Campbell. And we were a little concerned that she wasn't going to make it, but she made it. I went out in the parking lot looking around and I saw a woman picking up the cones and I knew we were okay. So, but Katie has dreamed all of her life about working with animals. She ended up with a degree in zoology from Kent State. Okay. And I'm not positive, what's the name of your organization?
Humane Animal Rescue of Pittsburgh.
Okay. So without further ado, please put your hands together for Katie Campbell.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for having us here today. So like I was introduced, my name is Katie, and I'm here with my colleague Sandy. And we are from Humane Animal Rescue of Pittsburgh. So we've got a presentation for you today. A lot of it focuses on our Wildlife Center. Have you guys heard of Humane Animal Rescue of Pittsburgh before?
Yes.
Yeah, have you guys heard more of like our domestic shelters? You know, has anybody heard of our Wildlife Center? It's out in Verona, so it's a little bit further from here. Okay, well, we're going to talk a little bit about it today. So we've got some pictures up on the slide. I don't know if everyone can see. It's a little bright, but I think we got some light dimmers over there. Oh, perfect. And Sandy and I, we like to keep our programs pretty informal. So if anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to raise a hand, shout it out. We like to have fun at our programs. So we'll go ahead and get started then if nobody has any questions. Yeah. If you guys think of them at any point, like Katie mentioned, just go ahead and shout them out. So some of you guys may have heard of our organization over the years from different names as well. So Animal Rescue League, has anyone heard of that before? Yeah, and then also the Western PA Humane Society as well. Yeah, so in 2017, we actually combined those two organizations. So the Western PA Humane Society, that location is on the north side, right by Heinz Field. You guys might have passed it before. And then Animal Rescue League had a domestic animal shelter in the Homewood neighborhood, right on Hamilton Avenue, and the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. So a couple years ago, combined the organizations, combined our names. That's our new logo, so Humane Animal Rescue of Pittsburgh. So the two organizations combined have almost a 150-year history in the city of Pittsburgh. So we're very fortunate to work for an organization that has some pretty deep roots in Pittsburgh for helping animals. And it's kind of evolved over time. But kind of what it looks like today are 3 locations. 2 of them are domestic animal shelters with a lot of services. So when people think of an animal shelter, they think, oh, I can go adopt a cat or a dog or maybe even a bunny rabbit. But there are a lot of other options that we have there. So does anyone have a pet at home? Okay, nice. Good bit of people. So we have a lot of resources for existing pet owners. So we have 2 veterinary clinics, and we're very fortunate to have a really wonderful vet staff there. And we do a lot of surgeries, spays, neuters, even microchip services. So we can help people reunite their lost pet with their owners. So even last year, we reunited over 500 pets with their owners through our lost and found department as well. And we also have, Katie, do you want to talk about the pet pantry?
Yeah, so we're advancing on its own. Technology, folks.
But we have a whole program that's called pet retention. And so the kind of whole point of that department is actually to keep pets in their home. So if somebody reaches out to us and says, I cannot afford my pet's food anymore, I have to surrender them to the shelter, we will provide them with food so that they're able to keep their pet in a home that already loves them, they're already familiar with, because we want animals to have a home. We would rather them not come to us at all if we can help it. So we have a pet food pantry, and once upon a time I was actually in charge of that pet food pantry, and Sandy helped me quite a bit with that. But last year we actually gave out about a little over 70,000 pounds of pet food to those in need. And, we teach a lot of children. And so, 70,000 pounds, it's a really big number, but especially for kids, it's hard for them to even grasp, what does that look like? So, we kind of were okay, let's Google and see what kind of comparison we can make. So we always ask them have you guys been to the Pittsburgh Zoo? Have you guys ever been to the zoo before? They have 5 female elephants at the Pittsburgh Zoo. And so if you put all of their elephants on a scale, that's about how much pet food that amounts to. So it's a nice comparison. You're oh wow, 5 elephants is kind of a lot of food. And Sandy and I also both worked in the zoo's education department once upon a time. So we're pretty familiar with the elephants there. But the pet food pantry is a really, really nice thing to see. Really helped, especially throughout the pandemic, to keep a lot of pets from being displaced. So it's a really beautiful thing. We also sometimes do low-cost surgeries, and we also help to promote some of the city's own programs. So the city of Pittsburgh, if you're a city of Pittsburgh resident, you're actually eligible for 5 free spay neuters a year. Who would have guessed? So we talk to people about those kinds of programs. If they're I can't afford this. Oh, you live in the city? You actually get that for free. Who knew? So that's another one of our kind of wonderful programs that we do through the shelter. And something else our shelter is really fortunate to have, we have a large transport van. It is probably from me to the wall over there. It is massive. And what we use that for is to actually work with other shelters in neighboring states, even maybe a shelter that is down south. Maybe they've had some pets displaced from a natural disaster, or they just have a much higher, kitten and puppy season down there where it's a little bit warmer, and they have shelters that are too full and overflowing with animals. So what we can do is we have a special team that can transport animals from other shelters and facilities up to us, and we can help get them adopted. So we're really fortunate to have multiple partners to be able to do Operation Pittsburgh with. And then we also have training and behavior. So if anyone has had a dog before, then they're a puppy and needs training, or even maybe just some general obedience. Or even if you have a cat or a dog that has some ongoing issues and you're if I can't resolve this issue, I'm gonna have to surrender them. We have a behavior team that can help provide resources. We also work with breed-specific rescues as well as a way to kind of give more resources to the community that might need it. So we have, even if you didn't adopt your pet from us, we still have those resources available for everybody. We also have a humane investigation officer, Officer Fry, who can look into any various, situations going on in our community that might need intervention. So we do have a humane officer as well. So if you ever, witness a situation that you maybe have some questions about, Officer Fry can usually help with that kind of situation. We also have a lot of volunteers. How many, Katie? About 300?
Yeah, I think recently it was about 300 active volunteers. So that's a lot of people. And our volunteer department, our coworkers, but also our volunteers are wonderful. At the shelter, we have cat cuddlers and dog walkers and people who help facilitate a rabbit romp. So we really are fortunate to have people that can come in and spend a little bit of extra time with the animals in our care. It's really, really nice too because, they might fall in love with a cat, and if they can't have any more cats, they might have friends who, they can help to encourage that. And kind of within the volunteer department, we also have fosters. And fosters, if an animal has been with us for a long time, or maybe they're a little bit too stressed out in the actual shelter, or maybe they're a teeny tiny little kitten or puppy that shouldn't be in the shelter because they're a little bit more immunocompromised, they can go spend some time in a foster home. And then that way they can, get bottle feedings, or they can just relax in a home setting, be a little bit less stressed, and then be made available for adoption from that foster home. And that way they can be kind of, transferred from one home to another, and it's a lot less stressful on a lot of the animals. So we have so much help from the community that we can't even begin to explain. That's a little bit about our domestic shelters. Now, we also mentioned that we have a wildlife rehabilitation center. And believe it or not, our wildlife rehabilitation center is actually the second largest in the state of Pennsylvania. Most people don't even know it exists. And that was me too before I started working for the organization. So what is a wildlife rehabilitation center, you might ask? So what we do is we take in sick, injured, and orphaned native Pennsylvania wildlife. And from there, we have licensed rehabilitators, and they help to make the animals better and then get them back out into the wild. So we see between 130 and 150 different species every year, but there are 3 species that we do not take, or 3 kinds of animals that we can't take care of at our wildlife center. Does anybody want to guess? We actually are okay to do raccoons. We have a lot of different permits and licensing, and we are good for rabies vector species. Yeah, venomous snakes is one of them. But, the public brings animals to us, and most people don't really want to bring us venomous snakes, so we haven't really run into any issues there. What else? We can do bats. We can do bobcats, and we'll even do little teeny tiny, people bring us like deer mice. Actually, think bigger. What do we see a lot of here in Pennsylvania? Deer and bears. They're too big, so the government has minimum standards for space. And being that our wildlife center, so this is the 25th year of the wildlife center, but the actual facility has been around since 1901 is when our office building was built. So it was originally a horse stable and a dog kennel that's been retrofitted for wildlife. But as you can imagine, in a Verona neighborhood, we just don't have the space to rehab deer or bears. But if you're like, oh no, I have an injured deer here, what do I do? You can still call us and we can give you those resources. So you can always call the Game Commission as well. But we like to provide resources for those if you need that as well. But last year, our funding. So we're a nonprofit, so we get all of our funding, again, from generous donations. So we're, again, very, very lucky to be able to do what we do. And last year, we actually saw record-breaking numbers at the Wildlife Center. So we saw 4,650 patients. That's a lot. Yeah, and believe it or not, there's only 13 staff members at the Wildlife Center, and that includes me and Sandy, and our volunteer coordinator, and our hotline operator, Al, who knows everything about everything. I don't know how he does it. He just has information. We can show him things, and he's like, oh, of course, yeah, that's that. Al, how do you know that? Of course he does. He's great. But, so there's only 6 rehabbers, technically 5 right now, maternity leave. But 5 rehabbers, and then 2 animal care staff. Now, of course, we have volunteer help, and that is, we have about 80 volunteers at the Wildlife Center who will help us do, cleaning cages, but they'll also do baby feedings. So that's kind of our most commonly seen patient are baby animals, and right now is baby season in full swing. So we have, baby raccoons, we have baby foxes,
Baby bats just came in as well, and
baby bunnies,
baby squirrels, baby flying squirrel. We actually just got in as well.
baby opossums, baby birds. Got a lot of babies. Yeah, a lot of babies. And so baby birds, baby songbirds, have to be fed about every 30-ish minutes from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. So we have volunteers who just get a baby bird timer, and when the timer goes off, they start at one end of the baby bird room, and they feed the baby birds, and they feed the baby birds, and they feed the baby birds, and then you know what happens when they get to the very end? The timer goes off and they have to start all the way back over. So our volunteers, we tell people all the time, we could not do what we do without our volunteers. So we're so fortunate. We also have interns and some a couple seasonal hands. So again, we're really lucky, but it's a pretty small staff and the work they do is really incredible. So we're going to tell you a little bit more about kind of what actually goes into that rehab work today. But another fun thing that's kind of up here is we actually have a live release rate that's about twice the national average. So given what we do, it's a really beautiful thing to get to see animals come in, not doing so well, and leaving, feeling totally rejuvenated and able to do what they need to do back out into the wild.
So has anyone ever encountered an animal either on the side of the road or in your yard that is in need of a little bit of help? Yeah, probably most of us. So the question we get is, what do I do? Well, first of all, you call Al, like Katie just mentioned. He can talk you through what to do. A lot of times, even if it's like a baby bunny in your yard, it might not need help. We have a little tool over here that we show a lot of people. So this is the size of a baby bunny when they're actually independent and ready for us to release them back to the wild. It looks tiny and helpless, and it looks like, oh, I just need to bring it to the Wildlife Center. But they mature really quickly, about 21 days, and they're able to be this size and on their own. So they grow up very quickly, unlike maybe some other animals. Our rehabbers is what we call our rehabilitators. They have an incredible amount of resources they have either used from conferences they've been to or they made themselves. So they have development charts with pictures of this is how old a 1-day bunny is versus a 5-day-old bunny versus a 10-day-old bunny. And they use those charts to figure out how old is this patient, what does it get to eat. So having resources like that available and having Al kind of ask people, hey, is it about the size of a baseball? Are his ears perked up or his eyes open? He's actually okay. Just leave him be. Or if you're like, I'm not sure if mom's coming back and they're smaller than that, he can give you some tips like put a ring of flour, like baking flour, around the nest, or maybe some string in a crisscross pattern and leave it there for 12 hours. If it's disturbed, mom came back. If it's not disturbed, then maybe something did happen to mom and you can bring her in. Because mama rabbits, they only come back to the nest twice a day. Once in the morning and once in the evening. So they kind of are not helicopter parents on purpose. They'd kind of be a sitting duck, essentially. If they were on their nest all day, hawks would see them, coyotes, things like that would be able to find their babies pretty easily. So they stay away on purpose. But any other animal that you might find, what do you do with it? Well, once you call Al, you figure out what to do. You can bring it to us. We do not have the resources to go out into the community to pick up different animals that are in need of help and transport. But we do have resources like the Game Commission, even sometimes animal control, and even a volunteer network as well can bring animals to us. But you can usually get them in a box, get some gloves, bring them to us. And what we do is rescue, rehab, and release.
Like that. But yeah, we actually have a baby groundhog as well right now. I got the pleasure of watching him get fed. Very cool, very cool. They look like little hippos when they're babies. We also joke that like groundhogs basically just like don't have a neck. I swear their arms just like come out of the, like, it's weird.
So we also have like an intensive care unit, essentially, for any birds that come in that may have a wing injury that they have to wrap. We don't want them to be able to have a big space where they can re-injure themselves. So we kind of start them small. Once they start feeling better, graduate them up to a different size room. We have an aviary that once the little guys, all the little birds get a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, we want them to practice their flying skills. So it has indoor, outdoor access. They can study the night sky, get used to the elements again, have a lot of different branches so they can practice their perching skills. We want them to be prepared before they go out into the wild. So we also have a really special enclosure called the flight cage. And it's a big, beautiful, octagon-shaped building. And it is really, really tall as well. And the birds that we get, like vultures, owls, hawks, things like that, they actually can do some flight tests down there. So the rehabbers will make sure they can fly a certain height, a certain length of time, in order for them to be released. Because if they can't do that yet, they're not able to go back out into the wild because they won't succeed. And we want them to have a really, really good chance of survival when we release them. So that's really important to us, is preparing them for the wild. But on this slide here, this is most of our common examples of cases we get. So sometimes when we get an animal, it might just need medication or fluid. If it's something that your cat brought to the front door, I'm sure that's probably happened to a lot of people. We see it a lot. Cats' mouths have a lot of bacteria in it. So we're able to just set them on a course of antibiotics, maybe do a little bit of wound care, and then they're good to go after that. So a lot of sometimes just they're a dehydrated animal, maybe just needs a little bit of love. And then also we do see a lot of animals, especially birds, that have been hit by cars. So a lot of broken bones and things. And we'll talk about these more in depth. And then, as you guys may have been able to guess, we get a lot of baby animals. So that's kind of the third main category of things we treat. Did you want to talk about the snake up there? I know you love that one.
Yeah, my favorite case, I think it's just kind of crazy, is actually the one up in the top right corner there, that egg and that snake. So we do have snakes in Pennsylvania, about 21 species of snake. And we actually have snake patients right now. They're still there. They should be getting released soon once it's totally warm enough. A lot smaller, but we do see snakes at the Wildlife Center, and up there that's a rat snake, a black rat snake, a very common species to have in your backyard. I know there's one that lives behind my apartment complex. They're great pest control, eat a lot of mice. They'll even eat, like eggs. They're actually pretty good at climbing. So a farmer came to the Wildlife Center with a snake and said, well, I have a chicken coop, and, in order for my chickens to be encouraged to lay eggs, I put out like a wooden egg. And the snake, they're not that smart. So, it smelled like an egg, it looked like an egg, so he ate it. And of course, it's a wooden egg. He can't pass that, he can't digest it, oh no. So the farmer brought us the snake, and there's an x-ray. You can see the wooden egg in the x-ray. So our facility, like we said, has a vet clinic, so there isn't like x-ray machine or surgery suites at the Wildlife Center, but we can take our patients down, which is why we are so fortunate to have such a high live release rate. So we actually took the snake down to our vet clinic, and our rehabbers and our vet staff did surgery on a snake, removed the wooden egg. The snake healed perfectly, was able to be re-released far away from the chicken coop, and the farmer got his egg back. Happy stories all around. So that one, I think, is just kind of, it really exemplifies that you never know what's going to come through the doors of the Wildlife Center. So every day is a little bit different. That's one of, I think, is just crazy. We also had another pretty big, we technically were viral at one point because we had a raccoon come in, the jelly jar bandit, as he's been called. He came in with a Welch's grape jelly jar stuck on his head. And so our rehabbers had to remove it. And the whole kind of importance of that one, we like to share that story. It really shows that these animals do live in your backyard, and you should be mindful of things that you're throwing away or making sure that your trash cans are closed, because this animal was in distress, and if someone hadn't brought him to us, it wouldn't have ended well. So he was totally fine. He was able to go back to the wild. But when we talk to especially kids, you know, it's really important to rinse out your jars and then put them in the recycling and things like that. So it's nice to be able to talk about these conservation messages and hope that we don't see these kinds of cases, but it's pretty much something that, you know, is always going to be prevalent.
And kind of going off those conservation messages, we do have resources for people on how to garden without the critters getting all of your tomatoes. I know that's something that my dad struggled with, is finding all the groundhogs and things that love to eat his tomatoes. This is a rat snake, again, that got stuck in some garden netting. So we do have some resources for how to keep the critters away from your garden, and kind of so you can coexist peacefully. That's one of our main goals, because when we can coexist peacefully, we don't have jelly jar bandits or snakes getting caught in garden netting. We also have some resources on what we call humane harassment. Now, it sounds a little weird. I don't know if you guys have heard of it before, but it's basically a way to deter things like maybe a groundhog or a raccoon from making a den under your back deck. I don't know if anyone's ever encountered that before. And it's basically making your garden or your home an area that's a little less desirable. So you can actually do things like play an AM radio station or just even some static. So it's a really unpleasant sound. So say you have a raccoon that wants to maybe use underneath of your deck as a nice place to have their babies. You don't really want that, and neither do the raccoons. So if you play that AM radio, you can even use a rag or an old sock soaked in vinegar. So not only does it sound bad, it smells bad. And then hopefully, even if you do have those little raccoons or things under your deck, if you do those humane harassment things, it'll make it very unpleasant, and mom will relocate the babies on her own. So actually trapping and relocating, statistically our rehabbers have found that it's not, it doesn't have the highest success rate. So if you can have mom move her babies herself, it's a much happier situation for everybody. And then once they leave, board up the area so they can't come back next year.
How many turtles do you see?
We do get a good bit of turtles a year. I don't know the exact number, but usually eastern box turtles. We did the snapper.
I was just going to say that, yeah.
Yeah.
What is common injury? The shell?
Probably a shell damage. Yeah, you can actually see up here, the rehabbers have to get very creative because, you know, doing some shell surgery is not something that's very common. So they have to come up with creative solutions. So a lot of times it is turtles just getting hit by cars on the side of the road. So they can use things like super glue and duct tape and even little fasteners that you might find on the back of like a dress to heal the shell injury. We actually have an ambassador. His name is Vedder, like Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam. And he had some shell damage that was too severe for him to be released, but it healed pretty well. It doesn't cause him any pain anymore, but he's also missing all the digits on his front foot. So he just kind of has a nub. He doesn't have any toes, and in the wild they would need those. The females, they need their back toes, especially for digging, for laying their eggs. The males kind of need the front. They eat a lot of bugs. Vedder loves a good bug. But they need those toes to kind of help dig for them out in the wild. So he's a case that was a little different, but we did have a, 70-pound snapping turtle? Or no, he was about 70 years old.
Yeah, he was close to like 50 pounds though. It was like 40 or 50 pounds. Massive turtle, just massive. Now, unfortunately, he had fallen or been stuck in some man-made like mine or some kind of shaft, something of the sort. So he wasn't in very good shape when he came to us. But just based on his size, the rehabbers guesstimated that he was about 70 years old, which is pretty substantial. So we do see snapping turtles.
He was about the size of the AV cart.
Yeah.
He was large.
Yeah, he was a very, very big turtle. Very cool to see.
And we actually, we did bring an ambassador with us that we'll share with you guys in a little bit. So kind of piggybacking off of this. So stay tuned for our animal guest coming out in a little bit. But another thing we see up there is the owl. That's a great horned owl. And we do get a lot of special wing wraps and feet
So our rehabbers are really creative. If anyone out there is interested in seeing more of our interesting medical cases, we do have an Instagram hosted by our ambassador Porcupine, and we do post a lot of interesting medical cases. What Katie's walking around with now is a wing of a great horned owl, and we can leave the stuff on the table over there for you guys to check out at the end as well if you want. Our birds, especially, sometimes they come in with feet injuries, and the rehabbers, again, have to get really creative. There's a lot of things that just don't exist on the market. For humans, if we need to repair a broken bone, you get a cast. You go to the doctor. Maybe you get a boot on your foot. Those things don't really exist for a lot of animal species. So we had a baby cedar waxwing come in, and their feet, it was a little malnourished. They weren't growing in the proper direction. So our rehabbers made him shoes out of cardboard. And the tiniest little vet wrap, so that red wrap that's there, they cut teeny little strips and handmade him little shoes, birdkin stalks as we called them. So they made shoes for him. We even had a raptor who needed a little guidance with her feet. So they used pool noodles, like the foam pool noodles. They cut them, that wrapped them to her feet so she could kind of get the right angle on her toes to wrap around the branch that she needed. So they get very creative. And again, a lot of these animals are hit by cars or trucks. So we do have a drop-off box if anyone does find a bird or an animal overnight. So you can actually come, it's a big cabinet, and you can bring it. We have carriers, blankets in there. You can leave it at any hour of the day, because our rehab staff, we're not able to be there 24/7. We are there 365 days out of the year. But not necessarily at nighttime. So if you do find an animal at night, you can bring it to us. It has a safe, warm, dark place to kind of decompress a little bit. And then up there in the corner is one of my personal favorite pictures, baby squirrel feedings. We see a lot of babies, as I'm sure you guys have kind of caught on by now. This is one of the tools we use to feed bunnies and opossums and raccoons. So it's a long tube. It has a little hole on the end, and you can put the formula in the syringe, and that actually goes all the way down to their belly. So with things like opossums, naturally, this is the best option for them, and they just kind of suckle it down into their belly. We give them their formula, and each animal has a very specific formula that's designed for that species and even for that age as well. So that's why we always tell people, try not to rehab anything on your own, because they have very specific fat and protein ratios that they need in order to develop properly, and we have all of those resources at our wildlife center. Does anyone have any questions so far? We've kind of talked about a lot of different things. Yeah?
Yeah, we've rescued a couple baby birds and fed them with worms and stuff. And we couldn't get them to leave. How do you release birds to the wild?
So with birds, they can imprint on people or get habituated, depending on the species too. If they're like, these guys feed me, and I got a home, why would I go anywhere else? So if there are baby birds, usually we tell people just reunite them with mom and dad, because mom and dad are much better at teaching them how to be a bird than a person. So you can always try a couple of different methods if you do find a nest and you want them to not stay forever or overstay their welcome. Did I see another hand with another question?
What happens when you have different species together and they start fighting?
So that kind of goes back to our enclosures. So yes, what if you have different species and they start fighting? So we try to keep them separate. So we have the bunnies all together because we wouldn't want to put a fox next to a bunny for some obvious reasons. So we do have rooms specific for those animals. Our avian nursery, each animal kind of has their own enclosure. And even when we have, say, a bunch of baby squirrels, they're even separated by age. Kind of like in elementary school, you wouldn't put a first grader with a sixth grader. So we have all the first graders together in one cage, all the second graders together in another cage, essentially. So we try to keep them as separate as possible, but there are some cases where things like opossums and squirrels, they like to have a buddy. So we try to have a whole litter kept together because that's how they would be growing up out in the wild. So we want to kind of keep them in as natural of a population as possible.
And this is just an example of some of the diets that we feed them up there. So like I mentioned, we have a lot of charts and things that our rehabbers have made. And there's a lot of very specific ingredients, and they've been tweaking these over time. They actually just redid the baby bird formula. One of our rehabbers, again, Lauren, she spent the winter doing a lot of research. There's constantly evolving research out there, and we have to stay up to date with it. So it's not just cleaning up poop or things like that. There's actually a lot of medical research and natural history research that has to go into taking care of these guys.
And then our favorite part is the release. So you can see we've got some pictures there. And again, last year we had, again, a live release rate that's twice the national average. Sandy and I actually had the opportunity last summer to release some skunks. It was awesome, you know. So fortunately, you know, when we release skunks, our rehabbers do vaccinate them right before release, and usually that's when they will get sprayed. Luckily, Sandy and I were unscathed there, but it was a really, really cool thing to get to see these skunks that originally had come in as little babies, you know, without a mom to take care of them. They came in, our rehabbers were able to get them to a good age, and then they were able to go into these beautiful woods with a beautiful stream and a field and in a place where they're allowed to be and are going to be happy and be able to live a nice full life. So it was a really just kind of beautiful moment. Another release story that really is kind of near and dear to our hearts. We had a turkey vulture patient recently who had lead poisoning, which is pretty common for that species. And he actually went through, what is it, chelation? I'm not all the technical terms, but chelation to kind of treat that lead poisoning, and it was very intense. He was with us for a long time. Our rehabbers put a lot of work into our turkey vulture patient. And right around the time that he was ready to be released, one of our turkey vulture ambassador animals had passed. So whenever it was time for this turkey vulture to be released, it was just a little extra heartwarming to be able to see him take off into the sky and circle and live out his life, whereas he would have passed without intervention. Yeah.
Where do you do most of your releases?
So we do have one of our rehabbers is our release site coordinator, and there's a process even on our website. You can apply to be a release site, and we have them all over the Tri-County area. You have to have our rehabbers go out and survey your property to make sure they have food, water, shelter, things like that available to them. And our rehabber made a big, beautiful color-coded book. Different animals have to be released at different times of the year with certain conditions that have to be met. For example, the fox kits that we have, we're not going to be able to release them until September, because September is when they would naturally be leaving their own dens and finding their own way out in the world. And even things like squirrels or bats, we have to overwinter them. So we have to keep them with us all winter long, like a chipmunk or a bat, for example, would be hibernating. And we can't just put them back out in the wild in January because they have no food reserves already stored up and they wouldn't be able to survive. So we do have to keep them with us all winter long and then release them in the spring. And we have to keep an eye on the weather too. We don't want to release any if there's a big storm coming as well. We want to make sure we give them the best chance possible to be successful out in the wild. So there's a lot of factors that go into it, but that was a really good question. Any other questions? Yeah.
I have a question about the bunnies.
Mm-hmm.
That you had mentioned earlier about how quickly they leave the nest. I found a nest in our front yard with 3 baby bunnies. So I was watching them for several days, and their eyes were closed. And then one morning their eyes were open, and the next day they were gone. Does that mean that they left, or did an animal get them?
So, you know, we already mentioned that Mama Bunny, she's not not the best mom. You know, they leave the nest unattended for good reason, but sometimes they make just a little scratch nest right on the, right on the top of the ground. So there is a chance that a predator may have found the nest. But baby bunnies, when their eyes are open, they do start kind of searching around for food. Maybe mom kind of moved them at that point. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't alive anymore. Mom might have just kind of scooched them along. They might be already kind of out on their own. They might be like hiding in the bushes and you're like, I don't know where they went, and they're there because they're very, very small. Last year was actually it's pretty much every year. Baby bunnies and bunnies in general, eastern cottontails, are our most commonly seen patient. So last year we saw over 1,000 of them out of that 4,650. It's a lot of bunnies. Yeah.
So we have a robin in the spring that nests under our porch. And we'd like to decorate the porch and sit out there, and they're messy. So what's the best way to move them out of there before they have eggs, before they, while they're still making their nest? You want to?
So if they're still kind of building their nest, again, kind of making that an unsavory place to exist. So even just by being, if you're trying to spend time on the porch, if you notice them like collecting sticks, you can maybe put them in a box and kind of put the box further away. And if you're out there, they're not really going to want to build and get comfortable with you just existing there. Again, just making it like an unsavory place to, if they don't feel like their nest is going to be safe there, then they're not going to build that there. It's hard, birds do tend to, again, technology, so hard.
They keep coming back.
They are stubborn, yeah. There's pigeons are even worse. They don't care where they're nesting.
There was a pigeon in my parking garage that was building its nest in someone's windshield wipers. He must have worked from home because he hadn't needed his truck for weeks. So they're like, all right, it's happening. So they built their nest just right. I saw 2 eggs in there.
I was going to say, Sandy sent me updates, and she was like, there's eggs today.
Yeah, so they'll nest anywhere, really. And sometimes they do come back to the same place each year, to the same nest. So once the babies have fledged and left the nest, you can always try to then remove it so they don't have one to come back to, and they'll make it somewhere else. But yeah, once they get comfortable, they're like, all right, I'm here.
We had some bird nests in our trees, and black snakes then climbed the tree. Do you have any bright ideas of how you prevent that?
It's hard to prevent Mother Nature in the circle of life, but I was going to say, if there's no other really available food sources for the snake, that might be what the only thing available to them might be.
The snakes then.
Well, we always say, you don't have to be the biggest fan of snakes. A lot of people don't like animals that have, more than 4 or less than 2 legs. And snakes, they fall into that, less than 2 legs category. But they're I'd much rather have a black rat snake that lives in my backyard that I never see than like 100 mice in my house. Because typically that's what they're going to go for. So if they are really going for eggs, they're probably running out of food sources in the area. So again, it is a difficult thing if you, like the birds, but at least you probably don't have any mice. Gives and takes.
Katie and I love to teach about those like unhuggable animals like snakes, skunks, opossums, raccoons, because they do actually have a really important job in our ecosystem. Skunks, for example, because they eat bugs, they'll probably be eating the grubs that otherwise would be destroying your yard. Opossums eat, my favorite thing, they eat ticks. They can eat up to 5,000 ticks in a season. And my dogs constantly are getting ticks on them, and one of them even got Lyme disease from it, which was not really fun to have to deal with. So just having those opossums in your yard is nature's way of kind of controlling that Lyme population, which is pretty helpful. But the last thing up here was just some of the organizations that we work with. To be able to do what we do have to contact a lot of people in the government, like the fish and boat park rangers, other rehabbers, also specialists in animal behavior or nutrition or things like that, contacting universities. There's a bird virus going around right now, a highly pathogenic avian influenza.
And it's very contagious, and we actually have our 2 buildings on a quarantine for any kind of waterfowl that come in. They have to go through a special process. We have to wear PPE. So we do have to contact a lot of researchers and government officials and people from universities and things who are monitoring the situation. So there's a lot that goes into it. We actually just consulted with the zoo's veterinarian and AVET's exotic vet for our porcupine, and he had some issues going on. So we do have a wide network of folks in the area that we love to collaborate with. So it's kind of one big team, one dream.
And then another kind of fun slide that we like to throw in there. So Sandy and I were, if you couldn't tell, we're kind of nerdy. We like learning, we like education. That's kind of why we got into this field. So these are just some apps if you have like a tablet or a smartphone. So the one is Seek by iNaturalist. So it's really good for identifying species. So if you're out on a walk and you're like, what kind of flower is that? Or what kind of bug is that? Or what kind of animal or tree? Does pretty much all the things. You open the app, and these are both free, might I add. You just point your camera at it and it will tell you pretty accurately what kind of animal or tree or plant that is, and that's always a good, way to learn on your own outside of the classroom. And the other one is Merlin Bird ID. Like I said, we love birds, we love birding, we like learning about different birds, and at our wildlife center we joke it's like a Disney movie or a Nat Geo film, because there are animals everywhere, and we're always outside like, what was that bird, or did you see that, or what was that sound? So the Merlin Bird ID is really cool. So what you do is you open the app and you can search to try to figure out what bird you might have just seen. So it'll say like, how big was it? Or like, where did you see it? So, I saw it in Swickley, PA. Okay, you saw it today. And what was it doing? Oh, it was sitting in a bush. Okay, how big was it? Was it, crow-sized? Was it sparrow-sized? Was it as big as a goose? And then what colors was it? Was it gray, red, whatever? And then it'll give you options for maybe what you saw. And you can say, oh, it looked like that. And then it'll tell you information about the birds. And then you can even listen to calls and things. So very, very cool information. And then finally, you can check us out on social media there. So Harp Saves Lives and Irwin the Porcupine. And that is our ambassador porcupine, Irwin. And we keep mentioning ambassadors. So ambassador animals, we have about 20 of them that live with us permanently. And those animals, most of which were patients originally and then deemed non-releasable by our rehabbers. And so those animals, they help us to teach people about their species and their wild counterparts. And so we brought one today actually to meet you guys. This is Gustav, and Gustav is a wood turtle. Now, wood turtles, I had never really heard of them before coming to the Wildlife Center. They are found in Pennsylvania, of course, maybe not so much around here, but these guys actually, as of last year, were put on the endangered species list in PA. So Gustav has a very important job to do to teach people about wood turtles. And as the name suggests, they are found in wooded areas, but they're also semi-aquatic, so woods that maybe have some, a little pond or a stream or a creek nearby. He's really gonna like that. You can tell, again, we teach a lot of children, so we say if you use your looking eyes, you can look at adaptations that he's got that will tell you about his species. So you can tell his shell isn't that high. Yeah.
No one's mentioned wild turkeys today. We have a flock goes through our neighborhood, about 20 of them. So often, our dogs don't even bark at them. When people hit them with cars, do they just cook them? Or take them out of your...
Well, people can bring them to us, if they're injured. You can also call the Game Commission, and that we do, also have a wild turkey who Mama Turkey hangs out on site. Again, not a patient, just a nice Verona turkey. Last summer, she actually had a bunch of babies that just followed her in a line, and we saw them when we were bird watching with our summer camp kids. Very cool, and we saw them when they were a little bit more grown up too. So we do see turkeys. That's something that's pretty common as well.
Any questions before we wind up?
Just a quickie.
Yeah.
You mentioned you're a non-profit organization. Do you have fundraisers?
We do, yeah. So we do have wish lists. We have, ways that you can donate, especially online. And we actually just had the Wildlife Center's kind of biggest fundraising event of the year. So it's a baby shower. As we mentioned, we get a lot of babies. So we host a baby shower, and it was actually virtual. If you guys are on Facebook, we did it all on Facebook Live. And you can actually just scroll back through like Humane Animal Rescue of Pittsburgh's page, and you'll be able to rewatch it. And so it was like a lot of, me and Sandy were pretty prevalent in this year's. We did a virtual tour of the Wildlife Center. We did games. We did more encounters with some of our ambassadors. There were also baby cams. So there was footage of a baby great horned owl who we saw, the fox kits, a lot of really cool stuff. But we do have a lot of fundraisers and supplies lists if that's something you guys are interested in. Any other questions? Anybody? Did you guys at least have fun?
Yeah, good.
Oh, thank gosh. Woo, okay. Thank you guys. Thank you guys so much for having us. This was really nice. Sandy and I, again, for the third time, we love teaching kids, but it's always nice to talk to grown-ups,